All right, guys, we're going to get into another hand here. And just as kind of, as we kind of get into some more of these hands, I wanted to just use this to kind of communicate how valuable the toy game exercises are for studying rivers, just because when you're doing the toy game exercises, you can study just river decisions in that context. But obviously, like as we go through a hand, I have to explain the whole hand. So this one's going to take just a little bit more time so that I can do a kind of a thorough job dealing with the hand. And then we're going to go ahead and take a look at the river decision and how I think the toy games really simplify things and make things much clearer. Okay, so we open the button, very standard. We get 3-bet. It's a pretty small size at sub 4x. This hand's a very clean, purely weighted call. Just very quickly, we can take a quick look at some charts just to make sure. So if we open the button and we face a big blind 3-bet here, this is to a 5x 3-bet size. So the big blind's 3-betting to a full 5x. You can see King 7 suited, still pure call. And of course, my opponent didn't even 3-bet to a 4x size, so this is quite small. And in that context, this hand is just the smaller they make it, the more you call. The bigger they make it, the more you fold. So this hand's not close. So it's a pure call, but I do think it's worth addressing just because I think some people will be uncomfortable calling with a hand like this before the flop. So go ahead and make the pre-flop call. Pretty standard. Face a 25%-ish c-bet, and pretty easy decision for me, I think. This board's not one that I raise a lot in 3-bet pots. Mostly going to be playing like a strategy that's dominated by calling. This hand obviously can't go anywhere, so we call. Very easy. Out of position checks. This hand's going to mix the turn. I'm going to bet sometimes and check sometimes. We're already doing fairly well against this player's range once they decide not to barrel down. There's going to be a lot of the value that just kind of bets the flop, bets the turn, and jams the river, and this player should be pairing a lot of that strategy with bluffs. So we're doing quite well facing a check here. So this hand can bet, but of course checking is very defensible as well. I like to check. And the river my opponent checks. So at this point in the hand, we have to try to construct a range for our opponent. As best we can, try to handicap what types of hands make lots of sense for taking an action like this, and then decide what to do as far as bet sizing for ourselves. So at this point in the hand, I would say that this player's range is quite weak. They're going to be mostly trying to do most of the betting themselves, and they have hands like aces or ace king. Or king queen, or even king jack. So I'm not really expecting a lot of really strong hands. Jacks is a hand that might make some sense, although I expect it to bet the river pretty often. So I think I'm doing quite well. I mean, obviously, a hand like pocket kings is still a hand that makes sense, but I block that pretty heavily. And I think a hand like ace deuce suited or something just bets down as well. So what hands do I think do make a lot of sense? Maybe like a suited 8 or something, like if the big blind 3-bet with like an ace 8 offsuit or something pre-flop. Maybe that's the type of hand that would take a line like this, or 8-9 suited or something like that, or 8-7 suited. Maybe those types of hands could play this way. I think that there's at this stacked up 40 big blinds, there's room for 3-betting not all in pre-flop with pocket 7s. Maybe that's a hand that plays this way. Ace queen is a hand that makes a lot of sense that could play this way. Pocket queens is a hand that makes a lot of sense that could play this way. And so that's where I expect kind of the density, most of the when we look at ranges, oftentimes we're looking at them almost like a heat map. And so when I say density, what I mean is the combos that they're most likely to show up with. They can probably show up with a number of different combos, but which combos are they most likely to show up with? I think the ones that I just mentioned are, make up a fairly substantial part of this player's range. When we're talking about, hands that are going to beat bluffs. Of course, there might be a hand like 6-7 of diamonds, but who cares? that hand's out. That hand loses whether it doesn't. Even if I have a bluff, that hand can't win. So that's not really a hand I want to think about too much. It's also, when you go back to the toy game examples, we saw a lot of situations where those hands are basically irrelevant. So you don't really want to spend time thinking about those hands, which is also something that's really important that emerges in the toy games, is that those hands are irrelevant. Don't even focus on them. Don't think about them. So it really, the toy games can help illustrate what combos you should be paying attention to, what types of combos you should be paying attention to, right? So in particular, I'm interested in the types of combos that this player has that can beat bluffs. I'm not really interested in the types of combos that this player can have that can't beat bluffs. Those combos are, like I said, they're irrelevant. They're just blanks. Okay, so in that way, we can shrink our focus, right? We don't have to think about his whole range. We just have to think about our opponent's range that can beat bluffs, right? So that's very helpful, actually, for shrinking the total size of this player's range. So that's one step. After that, we can, again, going back to the toy game methodology for how to play river decisions, we know that we're in position, and our bias should be towards betting larger, towards betting to larger sizes, okay? So In this situation, that would basically mean a jam. We're shoving for a little bit more than pot, but and we don't have a great hand. But when we simplify this down to like, okay, I probably want to bet on the larger side in position, it doesn't mean that you can't have any bets that are half pot. It just means that like if your hand's pretty clean, you should probably just be jamming. And I think that that's something that a lot of people would struggle with. I think that when I'm doing a lot of coaching sessions one-on-one with newer students, a lot of times I see them bet half pot here. And the reason they're betting half pot is because they have top pair without a kicker. And they're just like trying to get called by something that's like kind of weak. And they're playing like a very manipulative style where they're saying like, I really want my opponent to do this, so I'm going to do this to get that response. And that's not necessarily the way to go because you're not really playing a range then. You're just like, you're playing every single hand in your range in like this kind of like tit for tat kind of way, and not thinking very broadly about all of the hands you can have. And so in this situation, my opponent's range is quite weak. I still have bluffs. If you're concerned about, like what kind of bluffs might I have just busted backdoor flush draws. You have to call the flop here with like hands like 9, 10 of diamonds or hearts or clubs, of course. I'm going to have, but hands like that. I might have like queen 10 suited, same kind of thing. There's going to be some ace high hands that I don't necessarily think I want to bluff with. They're just too high up in my range, but there's definitely going to be ace high hands that are still air. So that if this player just folds all the time, then I would basically, if I knew that this player was check folding the river all the time, I could start bluffing with hands as strong as ace high, for example. So this player is going to want to defend the range of hands that can beat bluffs adequately against a bet size like a shove. And if I do shove, of course, we're not jamming for much more than pot. So this player can't fold much more than 50% of the hands that can beat bluffs versus my jam. So this player is going to have to defend with a large fraction of those really weak hands that we described earlier in the hand where I said like, ace queen is a part of this big part of this player's range. Queens is a big part of this player's range. I'm really not expecting to see really good king X. By good king X, I just mean king X that beats the board, where king X that beats the board is specifically ace king and king queen and king jack. King 10 is a split. So I do go ahead and I like to jam here, and I do think that this is the correct sizing. And we can go ahead and take a look at a third-party opinion, essentially, of how the hand was played, and basically evaluate my decision. So here we have Odin. I didn't build this program, so for people who aren't familiar with it, I have nothing to do with it. So obviously its opinion on my play is not going to be something that I can mess with or edit. There's no modifications to the inputs for this strategy. It's not like PeelSolver where I can change bet sizings around and things like that and do a little bit of manipulation to some extent. So getting a very objective third-party opinion. My opponent goes ahead and bets 3 bets pre-flop. We already have that set up. You can see that here, 50 big blinds. I ran it at 50, even though we're not quite 50 big blinds deep, because 3-bet sizing on the pre-flop was a little bit on the small side. So this just keeps the SPR the same by the river, or at least more comparable. So I ran it at 50. I did actually already run through this hand, and I checked it at 40 as well. And at 40, it's the same answer. So we'll go ahead and the answers are, the outputs are similar, both stack types. So our opponent bets 25% from the big blind. We're on the button, and we're evaluating call. So here you see like a hand like ace 10, which has to call. I'm just pointing out hands that will be air hands on the river. Here's queen jack offsuit, which is a hand that's going to be river, a pair of jacks by the river. Here's queen 10 suited with a backdoor flush draw, but there's queen 10 of spades as well. So you can see queen 10 of spades is a hand that is quite weak. You can see you have to call the flop with jack 10, which ends up rivering a pair of jacks, but I'm just pointing out how weak the range is. Here you've got 10-7 with a backdoor flush draw. Here you've got 5-4 suited with a backdoor flush draw. Okay, so really I have to call a lot. Okay, so I've got a very, very, very weak range. So people who are like, oh, what are you going to bluff with? You're just not calling the flop weak enough. If you're concerned with what I'm going to bluff with on the river, you're just not calling the flop with a weak enough range. Okay, so I go ahead and make the call. The turn was the 2 of spades. Okay, and we see a lot of barreling here. We see that ace king does in fact mix. We see aces and kings do in fact mix. Queens, jacks, and there are still some strong hands in this pair's range. It's not like they're checking total trash. They're not capped if they're playing really well. King 7 over here, you can see mixes. Kings, basically king X no kicker, doing a lot of mixing. But even even king queen, king X with a good kicker, with king X with a pretty decent kicker, is also actually doing quite a bit of mixing. So we've got a decent check percentage on the king X block for us, which I think makes sense. We don't have many chips left, so it's not like I can't get the stack in by the river. I don't concede much equity with no flush, with no draws out there. There's only one high card, which is a king, so there's not really much to worry about. So checking is going to be reasonably competitive because there's just no protection advantage to betting at all, really. Okay, so we get to the river, and I said that my opponent was going to show up with hands that are, we saw on the turn that there are some strong hands that get to the river, but a lot of those hands are actually going to be incentivized to bet quite heavily. So here's pocket aces, which does in fact jam. Here's pocket kings, choosing like bet pure with, to various sizings, not jam, but a lot of blocking. Ace king's betting quite heavily. Ace queen does not. So ace queen's a hand that just like once my opponent checks, it's going to be a hand that shows up a lot. Queens is actually strong enough to jam, which I think a lot of people would miss. This is keep in mind that this is now jamming 35 BB into 31, so you can see over here there's 30.7 BB in the pot, 35.4 in the stack. Queens is a hand that's actually strong enough to jam as long as you've got the right suits. Yeah, I mean, like we can go ahead and put the check out there now. We can just take a quick look so you guys can see the check. So this is the actual check range, so that it's nice visual for you. So there's pocket eights here, lots of ace queen, pocket sevens, some pocket queens, pocket sixes shows up quite a bit. Ace 10 shows up quite a bit. So these are the hands that like beat bluffs. Again, we're not really super interested in 10-6 offsuit. I mean, that's not a hand that's going to beat bluffs. We're not super interested in 10-6 suited. These hands, while they're in the range, they're not really hands that are worth thinking about at all. So you don't really want to consider these ones. Obviously, 8-6 and 8-7 are a different story. Okay, so this player's range checks, and we're now evaluating the in-position strategy, and we should expect to see sort of like a bias on average towards like larger sizings if the work we did in the toy games holds. So here we see the 25% bet size never being chosen for in position. That's great because one of the things that I harped on a lot when we were going through the toy game exercise was that really small bets in position just really don't make much sense and they don't work. So 25% here, not a thing. 33% not a thing. 50% not a thing. In this instance, okay, it's not saying that half pot never works, but it doesn't work here. 2/3 is really where the smallest bet size that you want to consider, and it comes in at a 16% weight for the range. And the most commonly chosen bet sizing is actually jamming. Okay, so the most commonly chosen bet sizing here is a shove, and it's for over pots, 115% ish, I guess. You can see that like king deuce is just a jam. So like king x no kicker, which is just a hand that I think a lot of people emotionally would bet like half pot with if I've never worked with them before. It's a very king deuce is a boat. Sorry, I apologize. King 3 is jamming, and king 3 is same thing, right? Like you guys got the idea, hopefully. Even though I'm a bit of an idiot sometimes. So king 3 suited here is pure jam, and again, this is the type of hand that people would very frequently, in my experience with them, they might bet half pot. Some people who really don't know how in position bet sizing works, they might bet a third or something because they're just like trying to get called. And the reality of the situation is you can jam and still get called. That's like the thing that people are missing is that if they assume that if they bet small that they'll get called by pocket queens or a pair of eights, and they lose sight of the fact that if they jam they'll also get called by pocket queens or a pair of eights, and so that's the key lesson that people tend to lose sight of, and it's mathematically much more profitable to just jam and get called by a pair of eights than it is to bet much smaller, and essentially like get called at a little bit higher of a frequency with a pair of eights, but make half as much money per call. So king 4 suited here. Pure jam. King 6 is mixing to the 2/3 sizing choice, but like you get the idea. The king X block is jamming. I mean, like yes, there are exceptions. Like there's a little bit of not jam with king jack. There's a little bit of don't jam, but like for the most part, as a human player, the simplification to like you should probably jam if you have a pair of kings, so you should probably just jam. That's a pretty good simplification in this instance, and that's exactly what I did. And we can go ahead and actually take a quick look at what the versus shove strategy actually looks like, so that you can get an idea of the fact that like you should be getting called still by worse hands. So here's 8-7, here's 8-6, here's 6s, 7s, 5. Like they do have to call sometimes. Okay, 8-7, 8-6, they do have to call sometimes. Okay, here's top pair. Obviously that's going to call. Here's ace queen high, which is going to have to call sometimes. Okay. Now, it's true that we do lose sometimes when we get called. We are going to lose occasionally to pocket aces and ace king, but also keep in mind, we also saw from the toy game that even though your opponent can have the nuts, if you're only at like around a 1-to-1 stack to pot ratio, that's not really enough to stop you from jamming, right? Obviously, if we get to like a 5-to-1 SPR stack to pot ratio or like a 3-to-1 stack to pot ratio, like yes, for sure, if they can have really strong hands, that's going to have a really huge impact on bet sizing. But at a 1-to-1 stack to pot ratio, like the fact that they can occasionally show up with ace king or aces or something is not enough to deter me from jamming. And I think a lot of people, when they're playing in these situations, they also just get really emotional about the fact that they got 3-bet, and they have this like very vivid image in their head of pocket aces because they got 3-bet, or of ace king because they got 3-bet. And again, they just lose sight of like the fact that if he c-bets the flop and checks down, queens makes a lot of sense. A pair of eights makes a lot of sense. Pockets, pocket pairs that were thin value bets pre-flop that call a jam, they make a lot of sense. So yeah, I think that this was a really well played hand by me, but I also think that it really illustrates nicely a lot of the principles for in position play in the toy games that we've looked at. So hope you guys got a lot of value out of this, and I'll see you in the next one.